This is the Mixed Martial Arts Beat for the second week of September 2014. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studio. Thank you for joining us for another live edition of The Beat. We've been off for the last 2 weeks, and of course, no shortage of topics to discuss, so let us get right into it. Joining us this week from FoxSports.com, he is Mark Ramundi. You know this man. He is Jeff Wagenheim of SportsIllustrated.com, and the man with the hat over there anchoring the show from MMAfighting.com, Mr. Chuck Mindenhalm. All right, guys, a lot to discuss. Never a dull moment in the world of MMA, but let's start with The Ultimate Fighter Season 20. It premiered last night on Fox Sports 1 here in the United States. A lot of buzz about this show. I think the UFC has done a good job of letting people know that it's different, that the stakes are higher, and that it was premiering on Wednesday night. So after one episode, what'd you think?
Yeah, I mean, it seems great. You know, first of all, like I'm a sucker for a good backstory, and so many of the women on the show have a really interesting, inspirational story. I mean, Randa Marcos grew up in Iraq, and then her family left there to go to Canada because of the war. And Angela Magana, her mother was a heroin addict, and she was born as a heroin addict, you know, from her mom. And you know, Justine Kish was a Russian orphan, and she was adopted by an American family at age 5. Like, I'm just a sucker for a good backstory.
Truly global when you look at it like that.
Yeah, it's amazing, you know, and that's really what to me brings in the casual audience is these amazing stories. Like when the Olympics, are come around every 4 years, what do they show? They show the athletes who have these incredible backstories, and it pulls you in, and it really draws you to them, and you want to root for them. And I think Tough 20 has all of that. That whole recipe is there for.
You know, it's interesting you say that because this man right here says he doesn't care about all of that, right? You only care about the fights.
I mean,
Don't tell me about the fighters.
I mean, I don't mind the backstories of the fighters. I don't like all the nonsense that sometimes goes on in the house, all the stupid pranks and all that stuff. I like all the backstory, but that to me that exists pretty much every season. There's guys who have interesting stories behind them. But what doesn't exist, what has never existed ever, is that at the end of this one, there's going to be a champion crowned. I mean, I know that when Matt Serra won that comeback season, he had an opportunity to fight for the championship, but this is one that has never happened before. And so to me, this is actually a sports event. This is not just a reality show. And in some ways, I'm a little disappointed that they're crowning a champion this way, because I'm not sure whether it's a real true test of who the best woman at 115 pounds will be. It's the woman who can best survive all the nonsense that goes on with a reality show. But at its root, this is one that really matters.
Normally, when they do these shows, we're fortifying these divisions. These divisions exist. This is one of those opportunities where they're bringing in a whole new division. So they're dropping it all in our lap at once. So you're getting the whole division. You're going to be crowning the champion, all that stuff. To me, it's sort of essential that you put some backstory behind it, because you have to sort of build up who are we looking at? Well, does it even matter to us? That sort of thing. You know, we've kind of crossed the barrier now, women's MMA, which it's passed with flying colors with Ronda Rousey and everything that's happened. Well, now you've got this new group of women, like you were saying, they've got some of them very compelling. And I was talking to Craig Borsari in New York when they did the screener, and he said that was a big point of emphasis. They realized that a lot of times they would have people fighting to get in a house. It was just sort of an anonymous thing. You watch anonymous people fight, does it really capture you, especially on the first episode? And they thought, let's splice in those stories throughout the thing, and they did a very good job of that. And I thought, like you mentioned, some of the stories are really interesting. It makes you care about that person far before you've seen it. Like most of those women in that house right now, you're compelled by a little bit on some level without having seen them fight. And I think that was the goal.
And also, the cool thing they did this season was they brought a bracket format. They seeded all the fighters because they're established. You know, we know who they are already. You know, and I think that just the bracket, you know, it reminds people of March Madness, and it'll kind of bring in. It's accessible to the casual sports fan, because every sport, you know, Jeff loves the sports aspect of it. Every sport, the playoffs are a bracket. What do you always look at? You look at a bracket. So I think this really appeals to that casual demographic as well.
The one thing I wish that they had brought back, and I know it didn't do very well when they did it the one season, was doing it all live. And I remember going out, being in Vegas at the end of that live season and sitting down with Dana White, and he was really high on the idea of live. And he at that time was talking about, you know, we'd love to do this kind of thing again, but it seems like that somehow someone convinced them that was not successful, and there was a lot of logistical issues about doing the whole thing live. But you know, the one disappointing thing for me is, they're going to crown a champion at the end, but it's it's already happened. I mean, everything other than the crowning of the champion, they already have established who was going to fight for that belt, but we don't know about it.
Does that bother you as you're watching that this happens?
It does, because it's a sporting event. It's sort of like, it'd be like saying to me, I want you to DVR the entire NFL season. and the week of the Super Bowl, you can watch all the games. And so I like to watch the Giants. This actually may be a good thing to not watch the Giants for a season this year. But to have to not see it all as it unfolds, but to watch it on tape all the way through. I think in this day and age, there's probably going to be somebody who's going to report it before and spoil the surprise. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. But for me, I just wish that it were unfolding live before our eyes. Then it would be like a real sporting event. But it's pretty darn close.
Well, there were already spoilers last night. Before that episode ended, I saw 3 different. Someone tweeted about it. I think there was a recap up on UFC.com prematurely.
Really? Yeah.
And it's weird because I don't remember those kind of spoilers for past seasons, and I think it's mostly because people care so much about the season because there's so much at stake. There's a title, at stake.
UFC.com. As I was watching the 3rd round of that fight, someone had tweeted, and just to verify it, I went to UFC.com and I was trying to not see what the result was, but I unfortunately did see the result and the recap, and they had the quote from Pettis saying, "Well, you just knocked out the number one person," and the result had not the decision not yet been read. But all that stuff was out there, I don't know, 5-10 minutes before the actual result was. So, this is the kind of stuff that's going to happen. But this is what happens when people care about a real sporting event. Right. Other seasons, we didn't care. Sure. Who really cared? It was, of course there were stakes for the guy who won a contract and became a member of the UFC roster. But the stakes as sports fans were not there.
Most of those tough seasons too, they were just battling for a contract within the UFC to basically go on to a prelim. In the old days anyways, you're going to end up on a prelim fight. There really is no newsy factor about trying to nose around about that sort of thing. So I agree. If they were going to do a live format, I feel like this would have been the one, just because it would play out for everybody at the same speed and time.
But I don't want to complain about it too much, because I think this is the way. If Tough is going to survive, this is a pretty darn good way of doing it. I mean, this is to have something on the line. I mean, we can nitpick, and I already have nitpicked about some things I'd like to see done differently, but this is a win so far.
We've sat on this show and sort of bemoaned Tough for last, I don't know how many seasons, but basically it comes to a point where you really don't want to watch it anymore. You're tired of the format. Yeah, it's a chore. It becomes something you're like, I don't really want to devote the time. Maybe you might do what you've done in the past. Maybe just stick around, watch the fights only, or you catch up on it at the end and just get the cliff notes of what happened. But this one, that's what's great about this season is here we are, Tough 20 out of nowhere almost. They introduced it, and here we are talking about it. It's to me it feels fresh and new, and I guess that's really a triumph all on its own.
When was the last time you started the show with an Ultimate Fighter topic? That's probably been.
It has been a while, and if we did talk about it, it was usually with a negative tone because we were kind of getting bored of it. I think the first episode, we have to remember it's just one episode, so let's see what happens. Was a home run. I mean, you had a big upset right off the bat. Tisha Torres, who a lot of people thought was going to win, loses. You have the bracket, which I agree, fantastic. Everyone knows who they're going to fight. You have the face-off right away. It feels like a real sporting event. It feels like the stakes are high. And I like the fact that there was more focus on the fighters and their backstories as opposed to those first episodes in the last few seasons. They felt like it was exhausting watching those. You're watching 16 fights. What do they all mean?
And all the people you don't know at all.
Yeah.
It's like any random
And that's
person.
exactly it. That's my final point. We are emotionally invested. We know who Carlos Esparza is. We know who Felice Herrig is. We know who Aisling Daly is. We know who Joanne Calderwood is. If you follow MMA in our world, maybe the casual fan doesn't know them, but for us, watching this, these are some of the very best in the world in this setting, and that's interesting.
And one last thing on that is, even on these first fights, you know that this whole field, these are good martial artists. So you're actually going to watch fairly elite martial artists go at it, which in former Tough seasons, that's not always been the case. They have some guys who can probably compete, some guys who can't. You can see even from the winners a lot of times from those shows, they don't last long in the UFC. So I feel like this is a unique sort of situation because you probably are dealing with, if not the best, you're dealing with good representatives of the best of that division in the world.
And the person who ultimately is the best of this field might be knocked out in the second round of the tournament because because she's in an unfamiliar camp and she's having to fight, a few weeks after her first fight. So there's a lot of factors that will not exist once they go out into the real world of fighting for the UFC. So they're going to crown a champion, and immediately there are going to be other people who are going to be right nipping at her heels and potentially are better in sort of the real way of competition.
I still wish that there weren't teams. I think when you have the 16 best fighters in the world, let it be every woman for herself. Have the coaches there. Maybe do a system where, all right, Pettis is here for this amount of time. You want to train with them, go there. Or you want to train by yourself. The coaches are there kind of like Season 4 when GSP would come for a week, Couture came, etc. But you don't have to be a part of a team because at the end of the day, there are no teams.
Especially for this one.
For this one, I mean, everyone's going for the belt. And also, when they show that little sizzle reel, if you will, at the end of the first episode of the things to come this season, and you see some of the drama, I kind of wish that we would be above that for this season because this is the best of the best. They should be professionals. They should, and things are going to happen. It's a pressure cooker. You're in a house for 6 weeks with people you don't like. But I want to see them represent themselves as best as possible, and I don't want to see. I agree with you in this case. I've always said, and maybe I haven't articulated this the right way, I hate the nonsense, ejaculating on sushi. That is embarrassing to the sport. Honestly, it is. I don't want to see things of that nature. I don't want to see brawls in the house. I like the backstory. I like the backstories. I like telling what we had in episode 1. Now, here's one thing that has brought up. If we want to criticize, it's the promotion of the show. Emphasizing their looks, their beauty as the first trait you talk about, and then their fighting nature in the second trait. What do you make of that? Is this par for the course, or is this unacceptable?
I mean, it's unfortunate that it has to happen, but I think it's a situation where, as much as it sucks, pardon my French, I think that there is a part of the audience, maybe even a big part of the audience, that actually does consume that kind of marketing, and I think the UFC is playing to that. It shouldn't have to be that way, and I wish it wasn't that way.
What is the demographic they always point out about this demographic? 18 to 34 year old males. I mean, that's the demographic.
Yeah. So it shouldn't have to be that way.
Honestly. You're introducing something. You're introducing. To me, it was almost like I don't have a big problem with it, and the people I've talked to don't have a big problem. Now, I've seen other people in the media, and grousing about it, etc. But you have fighters that what I took from those ads is like, here's a pretty woman, right? But look, she's a fighter. That's to me how it sort of came off. It wasn't like they were selling it in reverse. It was sort of like a bait and switch to me a little bit. And to me, that's the way I inferred it. Now, I've since read a lot of people who've really took offense to it, but I can't get my dander up about that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, you're working at Fox Sports, and it's a Fox thing, I think, even more than a UFC thing. I mean, I think the UFC would love to be able to just promote their fighters, but they're trying to get people to tune into a weekly reality show, and there are people who, even like last night, I was sitting down to watch this first episode. My wife comes in the room. She's like, "Oh, what is this?" I said, "Oh, it's the new season of Ultimate Fighter," and she sort of looked at me funny, like, "Oh, you're watching?" And then she's like, "Wow, she's pretty." And like, that was the first thing that she noticed. And I said, "Well, that's what they're trying to sell," and so this is, I think, what reality, so-called reality television, is all about, trying to find something that's sellable. And I don't know that being the best fighter in the world is a sellable reality television approach. I mean, I do take more offense to it than you do, but I realize
what bothers you about it?
Because this is just not what is. This is a sporting event. I mean, again, if we're trying to find the world champion. What bothers me is the same thing that bothers me when Dana White, whenever the discussion of Ronda Rousey fighting Cyborg Santos is, and Dana White starts, whether explicitly or implicitly, starts, talking about Ronda as being this, the foxy lady who can fight, and Cyborg as some kind of a monster, and this because they look differently.
Vanderlei Silva in a dress.
Essentially, yes.
To be fair, though, I don't hear him necessarily ever call Ronda foxy. He always calls her mean, nasty. He has those lines, but he doesn't really harp on her looks.
No, but that's sort of the baseline. The baseline for him is not, because he doesn't call Cyborg mean and nasty. He ridicules her. So Ronda, the baseline is, well, she's this really beautiful woman, but and then he goes on about how nasty she is.
I'll tell you what, the ladies themselves, having a chance to speak to some of them, I don't feel like they mind it at all, the way they were marketed. I don't know. It's one of those issues. I suppose if you're always trying to create a big picture atmosphere, you're always trying to uphold the most of everything, you're probably not watching this sport to begin with, because this was a sort of anti-PC sport to even get to this level. It only started to cross over. Now we scrutinize it on every single level, and I feel like that sort of negativity just collides in every single thing that happens in the sport. This has been the latest one. To me, I just feel like you start to read into things. Just given the key male demographic, everything that they always tell you about, everything that's going on, and the fact that they were basically doing a little bait and switch, like, are these pretty women? Are these no, they're fighters. To me, that was sort of like, yeah, it sort of made sense to me to do it that way. And the women seem to have liked it. I don't know. I'd love to get on the the soapbox and be like, oh, this is all wrong. This is the wrong message and all that. But to me, it's just like, it's just par for the course. That's what, MMA, the UFC has always sort of operated on its fringe. And to me, that's kind of, they continue to do it, but smartly. It's not like they're doing anything stupid on this.
I also think this is fascinating because I want to see what the ratings are on Fox Sports 1, because let's be honest, they haven't been great the first couple seasons on Fox Sports 1. Are women going to watch it more than in the past? And perhaps most importantly, what does this season mean for Tough 21? Because when you're making the stakes that high, you're putting a title on the line, you're freshening things up with women, an all-women cast. If you go back to middleweights and light heavyweights for Tough 21, fighting for a no, I don't know what it is. But if you do that, fighting for a contract, it's going to feel like going from the penthouse to the outhouse. Right. I mean, this really signals a change for the Ultimate Fighter. So it's going to be very interesting to watch. Yeah. So we'll see one episode down. We'll see what happens for the next couple months. All right, let's move along. Obviously, the biggest news story in the world of sports this week has been Ray Rice getting cut from the Baltimore Ravens after this video was released by TMZ of him knocking out his then fiance. And of course the NFL taking a lot of heat for this and only giving him a 2-game suspension, which the second game would have been this weekend. He would have been free to play next weekend. Of course that's not happening anymore because he has since been released, and it pertains to our world because of Thiago Silva. Thiago Silva was arrested in early February. There was a standoff. He was tasered, SWAT team and all. He was originally charged with attempted murder, and afterwards it was changed to assault, but still spent 30 days in prison, and it looked like he was never going to fight again in the UFC. The UFC had released him. Dana White said it himself, will never fight again in the UFC. He was going to go to trial, and then all of a sudden the charges were dropped. He was not acquitted. The charges were dropped. And then when that news came out, a very important detail. When that news came out, the UFC re-signed him right away. Jeff, I'll go to you first because you wrote about it this week. Was this a mistake by the UFC?
No, perfect. I mean, the guy was, he went through the legal system. He was acquitted. He's untainted. So, of course. No, I think it was a big mistake. I'll tell you this, that if the Ray Rice second video news had come out first, there was absolutely no chance in the world that he would have been he would have been re-signed, because the whole world changed when that second Rice video came out. But it didn't. It came out afterward, and they made this signing last week, and it was like, talk about, this is a guy who went from the outhouse to the penthouse. I mean, I think it was a bad move. I don't know whether the UFC is going to pay the price for it. I think the Ray Rice news, in a strange kind of way, has trumped it and has kind of pushed it aside. I mean, to some extent, you could say, well, the Ray Rice news is putting a spotlight on domestic violence, and therefore we're going to hear more about this one. But it's almost like it's raising the bar a little bit. I mean, the fact that the charges were dropped. I mean, this is business as usual for domestic violence. This is what happens, and it's always becomes a he said, she said, or he said, and then she sort of runs away and doesn't get her say. I think it's a mistake, but I think we sort of need a video. I think that we should have jiu-jitsu gis should be outfitted with smartphone pockets, because when that whole scene went down out at a jiu-jitsu studio outside of Miami or outside of Fort Lauderdale, there were a lot of people there, and it sort of baffles me why more people, other than just the estranged wife, haven't come forward to talk about it.
Even with the Ray Rice thing, and I totally agree with you, it probably, you know, sort of perfect timing in one way for them to do something like this, and awful timing. It just depends on how you want to look at it. But it's still bad timing no matter what, because you still have the War Machine thing, that all the stuff that has gone on with War Machine. There's Josh Grisby, who's, you know, all you could go on and on. There's like they've tried. The UFC has tried to basically distance themselves from those names, you know, because they didn't want that association. All of a sudden they have. This is in the spotlight, and they've got a guy like Thiago Silva, who, and there's not just a conversation to bring him back, it's just cheerful readiness to bring him back and defense for him, which makes no sense to me, because ultimately when you really look at him, he's not even one of their big stars. Now, he's had some good fights in the UFC, but he's also one of those guys who came with asterisk from well back. You know, we've talked about, you know, him missing weight, him failing, you know, synthesizing his urine, everything else. Or was there something else he did too, wasn't it?
Well, he actually was, two drug tests. Yeah.
So, and the marijuana. So, I mean, he's one of those guys who sort of is always, I always think back to the Brandon Vera fight where, you know, he's got a chance, he's got him hurt, he could finish the fight. He chooses to open hand slap him. I mean, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. And so when you get into those types of things, you think, why the cheerful readiness to bring in this guy? What is going on here? To me, it's like it shouldn't have been that automatic. And why would they defend him and put themselves through that sort of scrutiny? I don't really understand it.
Just do as many bad things as you want. Just make sure you're not caught on video doing it. That's pretty much the message. But yeah, I agree with Chuck. Like, the question for me is why? What is it about Thiago Silva? Is Thiago Silva, you know, maybe the 13th or 14th best light heavyweight in the UFC, is he worth the PR hit that they're getting? I don't know I mean, Dana White talks about Nate Diaz not being able to move the needle. Nick Diaz moves the needle, Nate does not. Does Thiago Silva move the needle enough to warrant bringing him back into the UFC after what, you know, we don't know what happened, but, you know, we can guess that what he did was probably not that awesome. You know, we don't know exactly what happened, but, you know, there's enough.
He claims it wasn't true for the record.
He claims it wasn't true. Right. You know, everything's alleged.
Right.
And he was, you know, he wasn't charged mostly because the victim, witness, the alleged victim, was, you know, no longer in the country.
Right.
So is it worth it? Is it worth having him? What does Thiago Silva bring to the table that's worth having? You know,
that's what I'm pointing out.
You know what? We can talk about it. We can talk about not charged. Dana White can throw out the word acquitted. All that. There's a courtroom where there are certain rules apply, and then there's the court of public opinion, and we don't have to have the same. We are not asked. We don't have to have things come to the same standard that the courtroom does. So we can look at that situation. We could say, well, we know that you know the news reports were that there was a SWAT team at this guy's house. We know that he was tased. We know that when he was sitting in the back of a patrol car, you know, he said, well, she wanted to take my money. She wants my house. Hey, man, don't report this. Well, if I didn't do anything, am I begging the news media to not report this? You know, we know that when he was on your show on Monday, he said, "Oh, you know, don't worry, I'm gonna go about my business. People forget; they always do." Well, forget what? What do they forget?
And that sort of attitude is really the problem. Yeah. That's really the problem. That very thing. I was going to point that out. Like him just sitting there saying, people forget.
With a smirk.
Yeah, with a smirk, and I don't know. To me, that just doesn't fly.
On top of all of that, he recently had ACL surgery. He's out for several months.
So that's why.
What's the rush to bring him back? He cannot compete for the rest of this year. Probably won't be back till the end of first quarter next year. So he's just sitting there like a big pimple on your roster and can't do anything. You know, like and the explanation I was given was, look, free man, charges dropped. We cut him, so it should just go back to the way it was. Well, I don't know if it should go back to the way it was.
Technically correct, but at the same time, there's so much in there that everybody understands is going on that it's a bad look.
When you're trying to change the image of your sport, and really that's what the UFC has done. When the Grisby news came out, I got a note from one of the UFC folks, you know, because we mistakenly, SI had mentioned Grisby as a UFC fighter. I didn't do it, but one of the headline writers. So they're very sensitive to this stuff, and rightly so. They don't want to, and we changed it to former UFC fighter because they're the recognizable name. But even that's accurate. They're trying their best to change this whole vista. And so why do this? Even if you believe deep in your heart that Thiago Silva didn't do this was all about his estranged wife trying to get back at him, you know, you just don't jump right back into the pool with this guy.
I think it would have been nice to see him fight a couple times, see him have a good record, not fail any drug tests and things like that. And yes, okay, charges drop, but see this guy be a model citizen elsewhere, build himself back up, and then see if he deserves it.
Any of the things he did previous to this could have warranted his walking papers. We've seen it with other fighters, so why? I just don't get it.
Friday was a fascinating day in the world of mixed martial arts. And I'm not even talking about the Thiago Silva re-signing, because that also happened on Friday. I'm talking about Bellator and the UFC running shows in the same state, the great state of Connecticut. 9 miles apart, UFC, Foxwoods, Bellator, Mohegan Sun. And our own Dave Meltzer has a fantastic breakdown of the viewership numbers, because it really seems like both products have their own audiences. Like there was no crossover whatsoever. They weren't really affected at all. It was very, very interesting stuff. But in my opinion, the I don't know what to call it, the skit, if you will, that was most talked about after all was said and done, after Jacare looked fantastic, after Ben Rothwell knocked out and jigged his way in the middle of the octagon, after Matt Mitrione's great win, after the great fight over Joe Lozon, Pitbull winning the belt, the most talked about thing, without a doubt, was the incident in the middle of the cage, Stephan Bonnar, Tito Ortiz, and the masked man, Justin McCulley. And people were outraged, yet still talking about it. So at the end of the day, let's put a bow on this little incident. Was this ultimately bad for MMA, bad for Bellator, or was it just plain goofy? Was it just a poor attempt to get people to...
There's no upside to it at all.
I mean, okay, maybe, okay, I don't mean to be biased. Was there any upside?
I think that Bellator is kind of like embracing the ridiculous. I think that, and I'm cool with that. Like, I think their entire promo, how many times was the word, or is it 2 words? How many times was Dick Ryder mentioned in that promo before the King Mo fight?
64 times.
That to me felt intelligent. That felt like breaking down the fourth wall.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was funny. And they've had similar like wacky promos like that in the past, and it seems like they're going in a direction toward that, to being a little goofy, to being a little offbeat. And if they're really making a commitment to being different than the UFC, I'm all for that. What's the big criticism of TNA? I hate to bring pro wrestling into it, but the criticism of TNA has always been, well, it's too much like WWE. It's like WWE light. I can see the same stuff in WWE.
Yeah.
So if Bellator wants to go in a completely different direction and bring out masked men,
you're okay. You're not offended.
God bless
you. Don't feel like this was bad for the sport. This is a black eye.
Do you remember the previous promo packages were always about like, this guy grew up poor?
It's funny.
I mean, it's just a complete 180.
Now it's Dick Ryder 64 times, and so why not?
I'm curious to hear what Jeff says.
I mean, I was at Foxwoods watching the UFC, so I didn't see live that whole thing that unfolded at Bellator. Although I'd planned on going over there, and I wish I had been there in a way.
Yeah.
But it was just puzzling, because they go through this whole thing where there's some mysterious guy with a mask in the cage, and then he's unmasked, and he's less recognizable once he's unmasked than he was when he had the mask on. It's like
2 masks, by the way.
Yeah. 2 masks. Yeah, well, of course.
Two
Well, you gotta be able to see. It was just I don't know. I mean, it's laughable, but we are talking about it, and I think you're right. I think that Bellator has said we're going to try to just be recognized. We're going to try to get publicity. All publicity is good publicity. We're not going to. You can't compete with the UFC by having. By stacking your fighters up against them. So what are you going to do? Well, you try to do something crazy. They were, trying to get Kimbo Slice back. You're trying to do this. You're trying to do that. Yeah. This is just one more step in that direction.
It was strange because Justin McCulley being sort of an insider piece of information between the guys in the cage, which was never sort of cleared up. So then I had to actually call Justin McCulley on Monday and be like, hey, what the hell happened? What's going on? And it just sounds like one of those things like Stephan Bonnar kind of going into the situation. They were like, hey, how can we spice things up? He knew he was going to get the mic time, and McCulley was in a Halloween department, basically like, hey, what if I got a mask and came out there? But it's like so insider. You don't know anything about what happened between Ortiz. McCulley was never the big name that you would wonder what happened between him and Ortiz. Now, if it's Jenna Jameson or if it's somebody like that under the mask, you're like, oh my God, this is crazy.
So if it had been like around Easter time, they would have been in the mall. You would have come out with like an Easter costume or something.
Well, the part that bothers me the most about it, and I'm not offended like you. I just chuckled. I was like, this is so out there. And let's not forget, back when Strikeforce was around, they had the women's division. That was their differentiating quality from the UFC, right? The UFC didn't have women, so they can have Cyborg, Gina Carano, these people. They were and they'd have fights like, you know, Bobby Lashley, and they had, you know, the tournament and things of that nature. So they could do things differently. The UFC has changed, and they don't have those cards to play with. To me, the part that bothered me the most was Stephan Bonnar said on my show that no one knew who was behind that mask. He had a +1. Like this is some kind of club, and he was, you know, he was able to bring him into the cage, and no one knew. Scott Coker didn't know, Rich Chow didn't know, no one knew. And to me, if that is in fact true, then shame on them. Shame on them for allowing someone to bring in someone else who they do not know the identity of in a match. Who knows who that could have been, right? Are we supposed to believe, because this is what they want us to believe, are we supposed to believe that everyone involved outside of Stephan Bonnar did not know who was behind that mask? That's embarrassing. I mean, given what happened in Nashville with the brawl, given what's happened with Nick Diaz
Coker.
and KJ Nunes, with Scott Coker, that you would not do your due diligence and say, hey, who is that guy? What are you doing here? What exactly is going on? What are you trying to get out of this? That to me is embarrassing. If that is in fact true, then shame on them. If they knew, then okay, that was just a goofy attempt to, you know, gain some headlines, and, you know, more power to you. But if they didn't know, I think that's actually irresponsible. You are okay with putting out someone there? I mean, Stephan Bonnar could be a mole from the UFC, and he's got, you know what I mean? Like, right, who knows what the guy could do? And you're just going to let him do that? Come on.
I heard it was met with a resounding. I wasn't there either. I was at Foxwoods, but I heard it just went silent with them masks because nobody understood. I wondered almost if it was like as resounding a thud as when what's the guy's name who was talking about the glassectomy?
Oh my, Jacob Volkman.
Jacob Volkman. Yes. I was in the building that night, and there's somebody who tries to pull off something like that, a joke of some kind, and it's just met with complete silence. That becomes humorous. It's just, it felt like that situation.
End of the day, the fight is happening November 15th on Spike TV, head-to-head with the big Cain Velasquez-Verdum fight, and we have to remember it's probably not going to go head-to-head with that fight itself, but maybe the prelims. Smart move?
I don't know. I mean, I think that there's already an MMA overload. I think there's already so much, and even having it like the weekend before is almost like, but at least this one's not on pay-per-view. So I mean, it's on free TV. You know, it's not going to be going up directly against it, and they're pushing it in a very unique way. They're pushing this fight in a very unique way. People will watch it, but if it's on another night, it might have, you know, possibility to get more.
Well, if Friday taught us anything, they have distinct audiences, so maybe it doesn't really matter.
Except Friday, it was, you know, a free card versus a free card.
Yeah.
So if you are Bellator and you are offering sort of second level MMA, you know, compared to the UFC, but you're offering it for free, and the UFC is offering, well, really, I mean, that card isn't so amazing. It has that really good title fight, but below that, it's not an amazing card.
And it's the prelims. They'll probably go from 8 to 10.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You know how they moved things earlier to not conflict with the UFC this time. If I were them, I would push it back later to conflict with the pay-per-view.
Interesting.
You know, take that, Scott. That's my idea. Because then if you get people invested in your card and they're not buying the other guy's pay-per-view, because look, I mean, and we were talking about this before. If someone offers me a glass of Coke and they say, but they're going to charge me $10 for it, and they're going to offer me like an RC Cola, but they're going to give me for free, I'll take the free one. Why not? And it may not be quite as good as the other one, but I'll take it anyway. And it cuts into the profit margin of the other guy. So if that's the way they're trying to compete, do it, man.
Bellator, the RC Cola of MMA.
Oh, wow. I do feel like Scott Coker this time has got a little bit more of an orange. Maybe it's his time with Zuffa, all that stuff. But he's sort of poking the bear a little bit more. He's like sort of seeing what happens, and he's doing it very silently. But it comes at a time where the UFC pay-per-views are probably not doing exactly what they should be doing. Where they're globalizing, so they're doing all these shows all over the place. This one's in Mexico City, so maybe he thinks, well, we're still a North American company. We're still talking about our people here, you know, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know, but you do see a little bit of that. And if you're going to do something like, you know, Tito Ortiz, if that's their big drawing card, if that's what they got, why not put it against a pay-per-view? Therefore, offering free TV of something that, you know, people have generally, in the past at least, been interested in, versus something that's going to cost you money. I mean, to me, it's just like a little bit of sportsmanship or something. But it's funny coming from Coker, because I think with Luke was on the show, he was always the guy who basically was saying that it's a distant second between Bellator. Bellator's not even trying to compete with the UFC. this sort of blurs it a little bit. I don't know what, it's a new sort of, it's a new
era. And they can't claim this time that they didn't know the UFC was on that day because, typically Bellator is on Friday nights.
What he should is be like, do you think I pay attention to what the UFC is?
Exactly. UFC President Dana White on Wednesday on Fox Sports 1 said that despite the fact that Alistair Overeem has lost 3 of his last 4 in pretty spectacular fashion, he will be back because he is a top 10 fighter. Now, this did not apply to the likes of John Fitch and Jake Shields and Yushin Okami, but I think he is a bigger draw and more people are interested in watching him fight, so you don't even have to go the ranking route. Is this the right call to bring him back?
Yeah, people still care about Alistair Overeem. It's funny, like there's always seems to be some kind of drama around Alistair Overeem.
Always.
Whether it's really weird, now there's the whole Anthony Johnson thing, and Andrei Arlovsky is like saying bad things about him to like the Russian press, and there's always like this interest, and it's usually negative. But it does draw people to want to see him fight for better or worse. People do care about Alistair Overeem for whatever reason, whether it be horse meat jokes or whatever it is.
You love the horse meat.
I tried horse meat recently and it was quite delicious. So anyway, that's neither. I'm not really sure where we're going with this right now. But the point is, Overeem, people care about him. I guess he moves the needle in a certain way, and why not? There's still interesting fights for him. I mean, I wrote earlier this week that Josh Barnett might be an interesting fight for him. People care about both guys. They're both.
That's a good call.
Yeah, they're both. They're both draws. That could be like a Fight Pass main event, or
Fight Pass.
Yeah, why not?
Come on.
What? No Fight Pass.
That's pay-per-view worthy right there.
Yeah, what?
Not headliner, but.
Well, no, I'm saying if
that would be nice stuffing in the middle of
a It's a nice third fight on a pay-per-view, or
And remember, he's may not. Overeem maybe shrinking a little bit, but he's still heavyweight, and heavyweight is the division where you
somewhere between 215 and
exactly.
You still need the roster. Always needs heavyweights, and is it 3 out of 4 losses now?
Yes.
Well, the last one, the Rothwell fight, he seemed like he was hurt pretty early, and he never really showed very much. But think about those other 2 losses. By almost any other referee would have stopped that Travis Brown fight. So he very much could have won that fight. And the Bigfoot Silva fight, he dominated for 2 rounds, or was certainly was a stronger fighter for 2 rounds until he got cocky. So there's really only this fight where he looked like really problematic right from the get-go, and so you didn't give him another shot.
And technically, if you squint, he's 1-1 in his last 2 fights. Even though the Frank Mir one was basically what was deemed at the time sort of a loser might be out of the UFC type of thing, Frank Mir ended up losing that one, and he's still in the UFC. But it's one of those things you could say, well, he's 1-1. You give him another shot. They want him around. I think it was pretty clear just from listening to Dana that's what they like Alistair Overeem for that reason alone. I think that people are compelled to watch him fight. Generally speaking, somebody's going to be knocked out. You're not going to see a lot of decisions with Alistair Overeem. That's the style of fight they like. You mentioned Josh Barnett. Timing-wise, and both now coming off of losses. Now, I was talking about this matchup if they were going to come off of wins, but Overeem and the Black Beast, Derek Lewis, still a good-looking fight to me. I know that one guy is like sort of here. To me, that still looks like an attractive fight.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. The thing about Overeem is that you always have that, he has that allure of like, what if? Well, if he wins 2 fights in a row,
they've tried so hard.
I know they want. I mean, who doesn't want that Junior Dos Santos matchup for him? That's like, that's one of the ones they should have just thrown him in, from the get go. And I don't know if he wants to or he doesn't want it, but there's always
they were supposed to fight. Remember?
They were supposed. Right. That's right. That's right.
He's blown it in the most crucial moments all through his UFC career, except for literally the first one, the Brock Lesnar.
Well, one knockout I think gets him right back. If he knocks out Derek Lewis, I still think people will still want to see him fight a top contender because that's just who he is. That's just who he is.
They want to see him get to those spots.
He's still intriguing, and most importantly, in my opinion, you can't release him at this point with Bellator coming up because he'll go to Bellator, knock out 4 guys, and people will be like, he's the number 1 heavyweight, he's the greatest in the world. You just don't want to do that right now.
He's whatever, say what you want about the guy, he can still hurt people. Look at John Jones.
Guys, let's talk about Ben Askren because he's taking a very interesting approach to his career right now. Dana White, back in Sacramento just a couple weeks ago, it was very clear that he has warmed up to the idea of doing business with Ben Askren after everything they've been through. And he's out there in Asia, ONE FC, doing his thing and dominating. I don't think anyone's ever landed a punch on him thus far in his ONE FC career. And then the second Dana says that, he just ramps it up, starts tweeting at him, can't say anything nice about him, and he's just telling it like it is. And again, more power to him. Do your thing. Now it seems like Dana is annoyed again and called him a bigger moron than Tito Ortiz yesterday on Fox Sports 1. And I saw him tweet someone said, how many fights does he have to win? Now he said 54. So all of a sudden he's been downgraded to, doubtful as far as his UFC status. Is this the right approach? Because I still can't help but think that in the back of Dana's mind, he's like, all right, I have a line, of course. As long as this guy doesn't make it personal, there's business to be made here. And again, there's something about the employee versus the employer that people can get behind, and the renegade and all that. I still think there's this. He hasn't ruined his chances. What do you think?
No, he hasn't ruined his chances yet. But man, he's close. He's really. I mean, he just doesn't stop. Like he just doesn't. If you just play the game, what does Dana White always say? Just play the game. Like maybe that much, just not that much. I mean,
you saying this on a soapbox or something?
I'm just gonna cut you off right there. So I think I love Ben Askren. I think that he's, is he the most exciting fighter in the world? No, but I mean, he does get people interested.
He's looking dominant as of late.
But
still, he's finishing those fights.
He's finishing those fights. He's maybe the best talker in the entire welterweight division. When he says something, people listen, and he's charismatic and he talks trash wonderfully.
Yeah.
Especially when it's against Dana White, it seems like that's his main target. But just put it to rest for a little bit. Get into the UFC, win a few fights, and then if you just want to bash Dana, I think that would be awesome. But I mean, just for a second, just get you want to be in the UFC. We know you want to be in the, not to sound all Kenny Rice, but he wants to be in the UFC. I'm sure he's making great money in ONE FC.
Full Kenny Rice right there. I can't.
Full Kenny Rice. Everyone wants to be in the UFC. I know he's probably making money in ONE FC, but
Dana mentioned Tito Ortiz. He was making a comparison to Tito Ortiz. Well, where did Tito Ortiz end up fighting all those fights recently? It was back in the UFC after a lot of disputes. To me, there's no deal breakers going on yet. He's still got another year. He has like 4 fights, something like that, left on his contract. Things, you know how this game is. Things change so fast. By the time it's really up there, if he's able to sort of generate interest the way he's been doing, my guess is he's back open for negotiation again.
He's his own team alpha male. I mean, he is like his one-man team. He is when Dana White told him to go to the World Series of Fighting to sort of prime himself, he went somewhere else. And I think that the general consensus at that time was that he's going to go over to Asia. He's going to make a boatload of money. He's going to provide for his family for the rest of their lives. But we're pretty much going to he's going to disappear. We're going to every once in a while we're going to see a little item somewhere on the web. Oh yeah, Ben Askren's fighting again, and that's all he was going to disappear. Well, that hasn't happened. I mean, he has managed to be.
He's talked about more now than he
has managed to go somewhere else where we don't, where the casual fan doesn't see any of these fights, and yet he is really, really, and he's really the topic.
He's great at pushing buttons, even Dana White's in the UFC's, because what has the UFC been trying to do? They've been trying to get into mainland China. Well, what does he start to talk about? We're already in mainland China. We're going to storm mainland China. This is what we're doing. This is going to sit wrong. This is going to get under the skin of the UFC. So to me, he knows it's a very casual sort of instigation, but he does know what he knows what gets under people's skin. And I think he's just an insubordinate guy. I don't think he wants an authority figure over him. I really believe it. I did a whole piece with him in Milwaukee for Fight Magazine back in the day, or not that long ago, really last year, and. He was going to teach the kids. Like his big things, his emphasis, you're seeing him in his real life. He likes teaching kids. He likes doing simple things. He lives in a simple, sort of environment. His house is nothing spectacular. I think he really likes his life. I think he truly believes he doesn't need the UFC to be happy in life.
I think a lot of people can get behind a guy, again, who is kind of standing up to the authority. Right or wrong, he's presenting a different image out there. And look, if he keeps on winning, Dana White said it himself in Sacramento. He said, it takes a lot to offend me. I could do business with you as long as, we can actually do business. Now, once there's no more business to be made, then, we'll see you later. But if Ben Askren keeps on winning, I think there will be business to be made. And as long as he doesn't cross the line personally, I still think he has a chance to be in the UFC.
I think you can sell, like you said, the anti-authority thing.
If done correctly,
yes. Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Vince McMahon.
Yeah, I was going to say that, but it was low-hanging fruit.
What a change in seat.
I'm about low-hanging fruit.
You replace Luke and you just drop wrestling.
Listen, no one can really replace Luke.
Is he a heel? Would you say he's a heel? I'm kidding.
You're talking about Luke.
Kenny Rice. But yeah, I think Dana White knows that. I think in the back of his mind, he knows that you can sell that, and Ben Askren is someone you can market, and I think it'll happen. I do.
He's being talked about on Fox Sports 1 and whatnot. Which non-UFC fighter is getting?
And what does he talk about? What's the most famous Dana White line? When Ambien can't sleep, it takes it takes some Ben Askren. Well,
that's a great line.
It is a great line. But he's talking about the fighting. Well, that's not the case when it comes to Ben Askren in the sort of in a more holistic way.
Right.
He's a guy. It almost doesn't matter on fight night. He's going to go out there, take you down, and beat you.
Great thing.
That's sort of what he does. But it's all the lead up to the fight night where he shines, and that's what you need.
And the great thing is he's planting seeds all over the place between him and Johnny Hendricks. It's like, here's your champion, here I am. You know, he's planting those seeds everywhere he goes. To me, it's pretty smart.
Yeah. All right, guys, let's end on this. It's a very busy weekend coming up in the world of MMA, combat sports as well, of course, with Floyd Mayweather competing once again against Marcos Maidana for the second time. But we got the UFC, Bellator, WSOF, ONE FC, BAMA. Cage Warriors.
I mean, the
list goes on and on. I mean, pretty much every major organization out there, as far as the males are concerned, Invicta just had an event. They have an event, but this is perhaps most interesting. UFC, ONE FC, BAMA, Cage. None of these events are on TV. Only WSOF, Bellator is on TV. I mean, RFA as well is on TV. But they're all kind of middle of the road events. You know, there's no real main event that jumps out at you. There's a lot of fights, a lot of organizations putting on fights, but no, can't miss show, in my opinion. So is there any diamond in the rough here? Is there any fight that sticks out that you say, all right, of all these events, I mean, there's probably over 100, fights between all these shows. Of all these shows, there's one that I must check out.
Best fight all week was Tisha Torres versus Brandon Marcos. Probably.
It happened already.
I'm just saying, best fight all week.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, there's not a lot.
That doesn't say a lot about the upcoming weekend.
There aren't a lot of amazing fights. I think Marlon Moraes is very interesting to watch. He's someone. The World Series of Fighting headliner against Cody Bollinger. I think that if you're gonna look at a person that you don't get to see often, he's someone that I wouldn't want to call him a must watch, but be cool to check him out, see how he does. He's climbing the ranks. He's a really good fighter. The UFC main event, Arlovsky against Bigfoot Silva. They fought once before. It wasn't the most memorable fight, but someone's probably going to get knocked out. There's a decent chance for violence in that fight, so it'll be cool to check that out. But as a whole, it's a kind of a bland weekend.
Before I get to you, how funny is it that Bigfoot Silva, who is coming off a suspension, is actually fighting before Mark Hunt, right? He ends up fighting before Mark Hunt never fought. Weird, right? Anyhow, do you have a pick? Anything
I want to say there's no can't miss fight. I mean, that's really. I mean, if you're at a point where you need a little bit of a break, this is a weekend for that. Having said that, I think there are little pieces of fights. I don't really feel like there's any fight that compels me, but there are fighters. I'm curious to see what Emmanuel Newton does. I mean, I think that. He's in against the Mexicutioner, right? Isn't that? Yeah. And so there's a guy who always comes right at you. And Emmanuel Newton's kind of a flashy striker, and it'll be interesting to see him against a guy who's uber aggressive. And is he going to be able to fend him off? But I don't really feel if you ask me if that's going to be a compelling fight, I don't know that it's going to be a compelling fight. I don't think it may not be that competitive. I sort of feel the same way about the UFC main event. I feel like, I'll be shocked if Arlovsky gets out of the first round, against Bigfoot. But yet I also like to watch Bigfoot fight. So there's like fighters here along the way, but not necessarily an opponent who makes it all that interesting to me.
Does anybody know if there's a sequel to the Notebook? I read that a couple weeks back, but I agree with you. I agree with you guys 100%. I mean, if I look at it, I kind of you comb over what's happening out there. A couple of the fights do look fun. I am intrigued by the fight you just mentioned between Newton and Joey Beltran. To me, there's he should beat, but you're sort of like not sure with Newton. What is talent threshold? Where is he at? I don't know. So I mean, you get to fill in a little bit more about him. I kind of like, in terms of fun, I guess, the Jessica Andrade fight going on. Yeah, I mean, she's going against the jungle fight champion.
Youngest fighter in the UFC.
Yeah. Pacheco.
Larissa
Pacheco. I mean, to me, that should be a fun fight. I mean, there's a couple of fights like that where I don't know what the stakes, ultimate consequences are, but they'll probably play out to be fun at least.
I think Jeff said it best. There are fighters who intrigue me. Paul Daly is fighting, and this is a big deal for him because he's about to go into Bellator. If he loses, that kind of downgrades his stock. I'm really interested in Liam McGeary, who has looked very good in Bellator. He's fighting in their light heavyweight tournament final. Another Brit who is undefeated, who's finished all his opponents, And I think that division in Bellator, the 205-pound division, could use some young blood. So he's looked good. Efren Escudero's back in the UFC, you know, former tough winner, unceremoniously was kicked out, and now he's back. So there are some fights in Marlon Moraes as well. I think he's a guy who's climbing the ranks at 135 and could definitely do some damage in the UFC. Maybe he's not that far away from the UFC at this point. So I agree. Fighters, but not so much fights this weekend. So that does it for us. Let us know what you'll be watching. Let us know in the comment section below. Always great to hear from all of you. It's a very busy weekend coming up, so we want to know what's on your mind, and let us know what you thought about anything we discussed on this week's episode of the MMA Beat. We are back next week, so I hope that is good news for you because we miss doing this show. Not sure if you'll be here, but I think you did a good job.
What can I say?
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you everyone for watching. Appreciate the time as always. For Mark, Jeff, Chuck, I'm Ariel. We'll see you next week right here on the MMA Beat.